Alright, today I've got out Tash Kalar, and I've got out, it's going to be a two-player game. You can play this game with four players, and I have played it with four players, and it's actually quite fun with four players. But mostly, I think probably the primary way people play this is with two players. But anyways, you got your board, and this is the updated board. I had the old version of the game, and I paid the extra money and got the upgraded pieces and such, which they are quite nice. I was happy with the old game the way it was, but you know, it wasn't that expensive to get the upgraded pieces, so I went ahead and did it. I paid a lot more money for my version of the game than what you would pay if you bought this now, because the game has come down a lot in price. With the new edition, is priced a lot better out in stores, which is good for you, sad for me that I overpaid, but I was happy with the game to begin with, so I'm not going to cry over the extra money I spent on it. But anyways, the way the game works is you have your dealt a basic hand here, and you get two of these extra cards. These are legendary cards, and the legendary cards come from a common deck over here. And your faction, and each faction is unique. You draw from your common deck. Each faction is unique, except there is one duplicate copy of one of the factions, and this red faction has a copy of it in the color blue, which is identical, so that you can play against somebody. If you want to play against somebody who has the same exact cards as you, you can do that. So you can just take the northern and southern Imperial schools, which is what these are, and play with those. Over here I have the Sylvan faction, and those are kind of like the nature elves type of faction here, and they've got two of the legendary cards. And you can see that what you're going to be doing in the game is, on the board you're going to be trying to make the pattern of these pieces, and once you do that, you are able to summon in the creature into the white outlined box here, and you get to do the action on the card when that happens. So some cards are easier to summon than others. And the other thing to note about the cards is up here in the corner tells you the strength of the piece that's being summoned. So I'll just kind of take you through just a turn or two just to get a feel for it. If you really want to see how this game's played, why don't you watch Rado's run through. He's already gone through the game and played it out, and there's really no reason for me to go too much detail since he's got that out, and it's much better than I could probably ever do. So when you start the game, the first player, well, before you even start the game, I'm playing the high form version, which I prefer this over sort of the deathmatch version. The deathmatch version is just you trying to kill off your enemy. The high form adds these cards which you are trying to complete these patterns. So for example, in this one here, envelopment, you have to surround the enemy piece by 7 of your pieces. If you can do that, you get 2 points. On this one, if you can create a chain from one corner to the other corner of the board, you'll get 3 points. And this one is if you control the center with one of these patterns, either of these patterns, you get 2 points as well. You can always see the next card coming up, which is Destruction. And so as these are claimed, you can claim 1 per turn, a new card will come out and fill up that area. So the reason I like the high form better is because I like the options. Instead of just going out and trying to wipe out the other person's pieces, you're trying to actually accomplish something else. You do want to eliminate your opponent's pieces, but you're also trying to accomplish something else on the board. And I think that makes, to me, it makes a more interesting game. But anyways, the first player can put out, gets one, you get 2 actions in a turn, but the first player of the game gets 1 action. So I'm just going to put out this piece, and the things you have to keep in mind, you have to kind of look at what patterns you might be able to go for here, and None of these patterns, I mean, these are great cards, but they're not really what I want this at this point. I want something a little easier to do. But anyways, well, let's see. This center cross has this kind of diagonal pattern on it, so why don't I just put one out? I could just put one out in the middle, or I'll put one out maybe in the corner here. No, I'll put it out in the middle, why not? We'll just go right for the middle. I didn't complete any cards, so I keep these in my hand. You are allowed to discard and redraw cards if you don't like what you have. But when your deck is finite, and part of the end of the game is determined by when somebody runs out on their deck. So I don't know. I like these cards that I have here, even though it's not what I want right now. But I don't want to discard them and not have them again. Alright, so the Sylvan goes. Sylvan gets to place 2 out. And this pattern here actually kind of matches one of the center cross patterns. Maybe I'll go for that, or this one's fairly easy to do. I get to place 2 pieces, so I think I'm just going to go here and here. I didn't complete anything, so it goes back over to the other player. Alright, now I get 2 actions, and I don't really... These 2 green pieces look a little menacing. It looks like my pretend opponent is up to something here. Looks like he's probably going to be able to wipe something out here probably next turn, but I can play. Why don't I just continue with my plan here? Just go with these diagonals, okay? So, whoop, go with that. Now we got Sylvan back out again. Sylvan is trying to go for this, but doesn't quite have it. So, why not? We'll continue on that. I can place a piece here. Now, I've got the pattern. What you're trying to do is make these 3, fill in these 3 spaces with those pieces, which I have done. And it can be any direction. You can do this. You can even do the mirror image of the shape. Whatever it is you're going to do just happens to be aligned with this card. So the Sylvan Princess will be summoned right here. And the rank of the piece is right here. So it's actually going to be an upgraded piece. So the pieces generally start like this. This is the upgraded version of them. And then you can also get these legendary pieces. And one of the things in the game, the way it works is when there is combat movement, there are times when pieces move. And the lower pieces can destroy other lower pieces, and you can also summon a piece that's already on top of a piece on the board as long as it's the same rank or lower. So these pieces can destroy other pieces of this rank. This piece can destroy pieces of this rank and lower. And the legendary can destroy any of the pieces and can only be destroyed by other legendary pieces, or there are some cards that have powers that will eliminate those legendary pieces. But anyways, this I get to do the power now since I summoned the creature. You may convert 1 common enemy piece on a diagonally adjacent square to your common piece. A diagonally adjacent square to... So there is a piece on a diagonally adjacent square here, and I can convert it to my common piece. So that eliminates that piece, and I get that. So this is discarded now, and I get to draw a new card, and I get the Kiskin Leaf Splitter. Alright, so going back over to the other faction here, well, that put a damper on my plan. I knew that something was going to happen on the board there, but I still stubbornly went ahead and just put my pieces out willy-nilly. Let's see. I could try and go for this pattern here. I've already started the diagonal. It's not going to be as nice though, doing it. I can do it by completing it by putting a piece here. So let's do that. Now let's see. Now I can actually summon this because I've got the diagonal shape here, and it's going to go right here, and it is the upgraded version. So it's going to go, let's see, it's not here, it's going to go here, and it's going to go on that green square, which is actually kind of nice. Some of these cards here in this deck do reward you for control over green spaces. So you can see there are definitely cards in here that reward you for those spaces. So it's not bad to have something out there on a green space. Now I get to do the action, which I don't think is going to be very helpful. Destroy an enemy piece on the marked square right here. There's nothing there. If the square was empty, this assassin may move to it. And I don't really want to move to it because I like being on this green spot. So that card is gone. And that's basically how the game is played. Now you also can get in the game one of these flares. And this is a catch-up mechanic, but I think the designer has also made it very clear that this is also a mechanic of the game. So it is a catch-up mechanic, but it is also something that I think good players have in mind when they're playing. And actually, I've seen it where good players have purposely started out slow, hoping that you will build up pieces, so then they can play a flare and have a really big turn and wipe you out. And I've seen that happen time and time again. You're almost baited into going ahead, and then all of a sudden you find that half your board is wiped out because your opponent has been patiently waiting for you to go ahead, triggering the flare and having a really big turn. So I think this is a game mechanic as well, not just a catch-up. But anyways, if it so happens that your opponent gets ahead on these upgraded pieces by 4, has 4 more than you, you on your turn get to play this action for free. If they also have 4 more common pieces than you will be able to execute this part, and if both items are true, you can execute the whole card for free. All these would be free actions, and it helps you get caught up in the game if you're behind. So I mean, that's another part of the game I think that's interesting. I think, well, anyways, let's get into some thoughts about the game. What do I like about the game? I'm not someone who has been a big fan of abstracts. My eyes glaze over when I think of playing an abstract game that has no theme or anything like that. And I'm a Euro gamer too, so I can deal with games that don't have a lot of theme, but I just have never gotten in too much into abstracts. Of course, I've played chess before. I like chess. I don't play chess anymore. I find chess to be burdensome to keep up with because of the static nature of the game and the openings, that if you want to be a really good player in chess, you actually have to study the game. You have to study, what is going on with openings, what's changing. You have to be on top of so much of it, the theory of it. And then when you're playing, to me it's just excruciating. The beginning of the game, going through the opening moves, and you have to understand the implications of every line in the opening moves. So if your opponent plays something weak, you can take advantage of it. But if the opponent is really good and knowledgeable of the game, that's not going to happen. So it's just this excruciating process to get to the fun part of the game where it opens up a bit more. So I don't play chess anymore. I don't want to study it. I don't like the static nature of it, I guess, because it lends itself to setting itself up to be studied, and that's work for me. I don't like that. And instead of chess, I like playing the Duke because of the random nature of the draw of the tiles out. And it's a game that has the feel of chess because of the way the pieces move. It's much more toned back, it's quicker, and you can't study out an opening. You can't study out the beginning of the game like you can in chess. So I like the Duke is an excellent abstract that I like a lot. I do like this game a lot. I like that the theme does work to an extent, even though it is abstract. When you look at the board, it's like, wow, that is completely abstract what's represented out on the board. But the cards do give a little bit of a flavor. You do sort of, you know, feel like you're summoning in these beings, and they do something when you're summoned in, and they have the text, and it's kind of, there is some satisfaction of playing out the cards of the game, and they all seem to make sense thematically. Like the infantry captain will do two combat moves using your pieces other than the infantry captain, and that's kind of what you would expect, the captain putting out orders, and that kind of happens. So the cards are in line with what they say and what they're supposed to do, and even the pattern kind of looks like the pattern of it. That's kind of neat. So I do like that there is a little bit of a flavor of some theme in here. I do like the process of making the patterns and trying to get out your pieces on the board so you can get that cool action that goes with the card. And I also like that there are these goals that you're going for rather than just outright trying to go after your opponent's pieces, which I think most games, most abstracts are sort of about going after your opponent's pieces and you know, eliminating them and such. Not only do you do that in this game, you want to eliminate your opponent's pieces, but you also want to go for these different patterns, and the deck it's a pretty large deck of these different goals. So there's a good variety in which goals are going to come out, which is going to mean that your games are going to be played very differently. I've had some games where, you know, there was a bloodbath very early on in the middle of the board because, you know, we had a lot of these cards that were all related to being around in the center coming out. And I've had other games that started out with some very difficult cards to get, like the legendary. The legendary pieces are not going to be coming out very early in the game, so that it did turn into a lot of sort of, well, there's no cards you can go for, so I'm just going to go for you for a while. So the game does play out very differently depending on which cards come out. I like that variety. I think that's a real plus. Again, so you can't study the opening position of the board. So, you know, overall that plays pretty well. I think how does this catch-up mechanic work? I think the catch-up mechanic also works pretty well. Because one thing I found is, like, in this game, it can get very back and forth and very swingy, which isn't necessarily negative. But, you know, for example, you can get a lot of pieces out on a board in a position like this. Your opponent can come out and play a very powerful card, and then before you know it, half of your pieces are wiped off. Most of your pieces are wiped off. I had a game where I was set up, I had all these pieces out on the board, and then all of a sudden, bang, half my board was gone. And that can be a little frustrating, and sometimes it is hard to see that coming because you have to be extremely familiar not only with your deck, but with your opponent's decks, and to get an idea of what they might be doing. And you absolutely have to understand what these legendary card patterns are, and you have to be aware of when these patterns are coming out. So if nothing else, you really need to know what these legendary patterns are. And again, that's getting to that aspect of abstracts that, or any game that I don't like, is that you have to almost memorize a lot. But at least it's not too many, and once you start playing this game for a while, you begin to pick up on these patterns fairly quickly. These legendary ones are pretty obvious, and they almost always include these upgraded pieces in there. So you can see these coming. So if nothing else, you got to get familiar with these legendaries, because these ones can do a lot of damage to you. And when you get those legendary pieces out, they're really tough. They're pretty tough to unseed them once they're out there. So I'm not so familiar with the game that I understand all of the decks and what's in them. So sometimes I am blindsided, and then all of a sudden I'll get hit. And especially if I'm ahead of the game and I give my opponent a flare. And that's another thing. They get these actions. So even if you know the card patterns, they could come out of nowhere, execute a flare, and get one of these patterns that does a lot of damage to you all at once, and you won't even see it coming. So the board itself is constantly morphing. So you want to get your pieces out. You want to get in. You want to accomplish the task, and then you don't have to worry about getting out. Your opponent will make sure that happens. You'll be blasted off the board. So that's a plus and a minus. You know, I kind of like that the board's constantly changing and evolving. And if you get knocked out a good amount of your pieces, with these flares, you can get right back in the game, and you just go for the next task. So you're not completely out of the game, even if you do take a big hit. But it is, if you don't like the sort of the, it can be very devastating, and to see half of your board that you have tried to set yourself up for that final move, you're almost there, and all of a sudden you get wiped out. Some people are not going to like that. I don't mind it so much, though. I still get frustrated once in a while when that happens. But, you know, it's the nature of the game, and these flares ensure that the game, that you will be able to come back if that happens. So that works pretty well. I think it's a pretty tight, well-designed game, as you would expect from any Velada Chavatal game. They're well-designed. The artwork is fantastic. When the game, you know, a couple of things hurt the game, I think, when it came out. The number one thing I think that hurt the game is abstracts I don't think sell very well. So, you know, as soon as this game came out and there was talk about it being an abstract, I think that turned off a lot of people. And then Z-Man Games had this game priced out very, very expensive for what I thought you got. It was a pricey game. The components, I mean, they're fine. They were workable and everything, but when the amount that people paid for the game, the original version of it, and what they got did not match up. So I think that was a disappointment. The new version of the game is priced better, and you get better components. So that just kind of shows there was some kind of disconnect with that original pricing, and now that the game is back out in the second version of it and a better price, it's even more appealing, I think, to go out and buy. Yeah, so the basic big annoying thing is when you get knocked off a lot of your pieces and you're not familiar enough with the decks to see it coming. So it is one of those games where more advanced players, the more familiar you are with the patterns, and the better that you can see those patterns coming from your opponent, the more you're going to be able to navigate yourself and stay clear of those devastating moves that are going to wipe you out. Like, you know, I kind of, even in the beginning of this game, I sort of walked right into a trap and got some of my pieces knocked out. So, you know, there's a lot to think about in the game. You know, sometimes, like, I've seen games where some players, like, will kind of try and stay away from the other player, and there are some advantages to that. Like, they're not going to be able to wipe out what you have, so you can kind of slowly, gradually build up. But then, like I said before, sometimes you get a card like this, Center Cross, you don't necessarily want to just give up on that, so you might be going right into the middle trying to get that, and from the very beginning of the game, this conflict going on. So the games do tend to play out fairly differently. I think the unpredictability, especially if you don't understand the cards of your opponent's deck, and sometimes, you know, you might see a pattern out on the board. That doesn't necessarily mean that your opponent has the card. Like, for example, we just take these two pieces off, and that might be that pattern out on the board. So if you look at these two cards here, that pattern is this, but it's also a part of this too. So, you know, which card does your opponent have? Maybe he or she's got both cards. Maybe one card. There's no guarantee that they have either of these, really. So it is hard to guess what your opponent may have. I'm sure the more advanced players are much better at it, and I think you probably develop some kind of a strategy where you account for that sort of thing. You know, even like some of these cards, a lot of these cards that the Sylvan player has that triangle, and this also has that triangle. So you know, which pattern is it? Don't know. Even this one. So you don't know what it is exactly as it comes in. So I guess if you see that triangle pattern, you know something is coming. You just don't know what. So you can get blindsided a little bit, I guess, in that regard. That's the most frustrating part of the game, when all of a sudden you get hit by something that you did not see coming. But I have enjoyed it quite a bit. I've played it on Yucata, and I've played it a variety of players of various skills levels. I've been mopped off the table many a time. I've been frustrated a few times for sure, and it's just interesting to watch the different ways that people approach the game. I think that the mark of a really good game is that there's a lot of different ways that people can play it and be successful with it, so I like that. You know, for an abstract, I think this is a lot of people I think have said that this is an abstract that your regular Euro gamers can like and such, and I think I agree with that. I've liked it so far. The other thing about the game is it actually can be played with 4 players. And a lot of these head-to-head abstracts you can't do that with 4 players. You're usually designed to be played with 2. And this actually plays, I think it plays pretty well with 4, I'm sorry. I got a chance to play this at TotalCon with 4 players, and I had a ball playing it. The way the 4-player game works is that you have a teammate who also has their own deck. So you each have your own separate deck of cards. You draw your cards up normally, so you get your hand of the size of 3, okay? But you share the legendary cards. So you'll have your hand of 3, and you will play your actions out, and then you will hand your cards over to the other player, and on their turn they will have their 3 cards and they will also have access to this. So you can both see these cards, but you're not allowed to talk about what you have in your hand for these patterns. So on your turn you might be trying to set up what your opponent's doing, or be setting up this card, and or try and take advantage of some pattern that you have in your hand. What you can also do on your turn is, like, if you feel like, oh, I can't really make any of my patterns, I can turn over the rest of my turn over to my opponent. Now, they cannot summon a card on their turn, but what they can do is take any actions that you give them and place pieces out on the board, which is interesting as far as, you know, there are times in the game when you might want to do that. So I think I had a great time playing that as a 4-player game, and there you know, you're trying to provide hints to your fellow player as this is going on. You're trying to set up these things on the board, and you're just hoping that they're going to pick up on it and complete the patterns. And you know, sometimes you'll be handing off your part of your turn to your fellow player and such. And well, we had a great time playing it. It was a great time. I liked it as much as I liked the 2-player game. I think another player I was playing with, Tom, said he liked the 2-player version, still liked the 2-player version better, but I really did enjoy that 4-player version quite a bit. So that's definitely a plus as far as this goes in terms of that sort of extra dimension. Probably most players are going to say that the two players is definitely the bread and butter, but the four player was a lot of fun. So yeah, I think I recommend this game. I probably recommend that you try it if possible first. I know that a lot of players can't do that, and I'm like one of those players. Like I usually can't try the games before I buy them. I have to just go for it, and if I don't like it, trade it away or whatever. But it definitely is one of those things. If you're not a fan of abstracts, this might be a game that you like. And also the Duke. I think the Duke is a great one to look at too if you want to try an abstract.
All right, Simic says game is really good and interesting with unique playstyle. I like games that use unique playstyles. It is great that we have two game modules, deathmatch and high form, so we can enjoy different gaming experiences. Also, I'd like to highlight the fact that we have three completely different decks for play, and that is also great. And I don't think I really mentioned that so much in my review about, but it is really neat that you have different decks that are asymmetrical. You have two that are symmetrical, and then some other choices that are asymmetrical. And I always like games that have that element, as long as they work. I decided to play the game. I decided to buy the game after playing on Board Game Arena, and that's another bonus to this game. This is a game that you need to get some plays in to get going with it, and I think it's one of those things that once you start getting to go with it, you're going to want to find other players. And Board Game Arena, uh, you've got that avenue to find games on Board Game Arena. So, uh, if it wasn't for Board Game Arena, I probably wouldn't be playing this game very much at all. So I think it's a big plus that there's availability to play this online. Okay, Galego, who taught me the four-player version of this game, we had a great time playing it at TotalCon. Says it pains me to ding a fabulous game due to publisher decisions, but the ratio of price to component quality in this game is terrible. Components are middle of the road quality, including cards that aren't standard size, so they can't be easily sleeved. But the MSRP is within $5 of Agricola, which comes with a ton of little wooden bits, consequently knocking off half a point for a rating. So you can do the math and figure out what I think of the game itself. So unfortunately, Gallego and I paid much higher price than people are paying for the second edition of the game. But fortunately, our loss is their gain. Fortunately for them, they get to pay a little bit cheaper, and maybe the game will sell better and become more popular, and everybody will benefit. The total says an excellent hybrid like many of Velada's games, however prone to board stagnation or rage quits when played by folks who aren't familiar with it yet. I find it challenging, yet so have mostly stopped trying to introduce it to friends. And yeah, I think this is a game that could lend itself towards rage quits because in the game you can have your position totally blown apart in one turn, and even though you can come back, that's pretty hard to take for a lot of people. Update: I've played almost 20 games in the first week of Tash Kalar on Board Game Arena, and I'm raising my rating to a 9. Much like Major Knight, there's a precise tactical puzzle of can I grab this goal this turn but by any means, and then in the intuitive strategic game of is that worth it? And because taking goals almost always comes at a high cost, but you have to do it sometime. The interplay of these two layers is full of tension. But also like Mage Knight, none of that is visible until you have some skill at the game, and the beginning can be tough. And I think getting through that beginning learning curve is very tough, and most people are going to be turned off by that right away. But for those people who stick with it and have enough of an interest to stick with it, I think that it is they're going to find that it is an excellent abstract game to learn, especially with Board Game Arena. Okay, Zombie God says a brain burner of an abstract. Palomino meets Magic the Gathering. Some really powerful combos make for devastating attacks and comebacks, and I think the game is pretty swingy. Uh, you can be behind and come back, or you can have a whole lot of stuff on your board and have it suddenly just disappear almost entirely in a turn. Played deathmatch, which didn't go down too well with the wife, but high form seems to be the sweet spot, and I definitely agree. High form to me was the better way to play it. And now in big red bold, it goes on to say a big disappointment on the quality and durability of the components. The tokens should have been thick, colored wooden discs with applied stickers rather than thin, punched out cardboard. The board is likewise a very flimsy and lightweight affair. And then goes on to say he made his own set. So let's check that out. This is what the components should have been. Now those are cool. That would have been great if the game was wooden discs with stickers on them like that. That really would have been great. I am happier with the second version of the components, but those are really awesome. All right, Benny D says, as with most Shavadal games, there are layers of interesting mechanics, but always one or two layers too far. And that's actually kind of a pretty accurate way to describe a lot of Shavadal games. His games have layers and layers of mechanics in them, and sometimes they're almost too dense. Even though I do like a lot of Chivadal games a lot, they're the type of thing you have to be in the mood for because of all the layers and the density of the games. Goes on to say the core gameplay is too abstract to please the Euro crowd, and the extra layers are too baroque to please abstract gamers. That seems like it would fit my sweet spot, but I found the planning to be overwhelming, would necessitate a decent time investment in the game to get to the point where I could feel comfortable with all the mechanics and formulate long-term strategy. And that's probably a pretty accurate assessment here. A lot of abstract games in general, they have a basic set of rules. The rules tend to be very simple, but the combinations that happen during the play is where you get, the meat of the games. Whereas this abstract game, it has a lot in it as far as the card powers, the flares, and it's not just the pieces on the board. There are other things that are going on. So it does sort of fall in between worlds. And perhaps it is a little baroque for the abstract gamers, but not having enough theme, or not having enough too abstract for the Euro crowd. But anyways, it for me it works. Tank Bard says maybe it's just a failure of hype, but I feel pretty disappointed by Tash Kalar. It's just a pattern matching, and there doesn't seem to be any deep strategy, just a matter of whether you can value your one-of-a-kind cards in the proper way, and much more importantly, whether you can draw them in an order that favors your contingency planning. And one of the big criticisms of the game is sort of that random draw and the randomness in the game. I will say, though, that people who have spent the time in the game learning the patterns and learning the cards, even though there is some randomness in how the cards come out, a really good player is going to beat somebody of lesser skill most of the time because they understand how the game works and the strategies of it. When you have two equal players, yes, then the randomness begins to come in. But it's one of those things where there's a pretty long curve of learning where, if you're playing somebody and you're losing at the beginning, there's so much room for you to improve and get better with it. But it's one of those things where most people are not going to get to that point, and they're just going to be very frustrated with the game very early on, and then they're going to give up on it, which is fine. And I think that's what most people are going to come to that conclusion with the game, because it is a bit of an investment as far as you have to play and learn it and kind of grow with it. And if you're not willing to do that, it's not going to be a very, very good game for you. Final one, I'm going to do two for the price of one here. We got M-Pin and TK Zuberon. M-Pin says, I know some people like these types of games, but this one actually made me sick. I don't enjoy trying to figure out these strange patterns, only to have them completely altered by my turn. I will not be trying this one again. And I think Mpin does hit something here. One of the frustrating parts of the game is you start laying out your pieces, and then they get nuked. So you don't really know what pieces you're going to have on your next turn, and it's very hard to complete a pattern as somebody else is constantly destroying what you're doing. TK Zubron goes on to say they couldn't use any of the tens of different standard card sleeve sizes. I always sleeve my cards, making this game unplayable for me. The game is de facto broken to me. I'm a big card sleever too, and I am very frustrated by the sizes, and I think Velada tends to use these odd card sizes sometimes in his designs. I understand why the cards are bigger, so that you can see the pictures and read the text really well for the game. But it just seems like if they had been one of the larger standard sizes, it would have made things a lot easier. I did sleeve my cards, and I can't remember what size sleeves I bought, and they weren't the premium sleeves. I couldn't get premium sleeves, so they are kind of these thin sleeves that I don't like, and I think I had to trim them to get them to fit. So it was annoying, but I did sleeve my cards.